especially when you are one of those women who have, you've been busting your butt and you've made it to whatever level that you've made it to. Uh, I think what happens as a switch has to turn on for you to stop and look around and recognize that you're actually kind of above the clouds now. And the grind season has to come to a halt. But it is really hard when you have built up years and years and years of momentum and a whole identity around looking and being and acting and doing productivity, to step outside of that. It feels very painful. It feels very scary, but it is incredibly necessary to actually stop and take a bird's eye view and start making decisions from a more intrinsic place. So it's the stopping that matters most.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Monique Shields, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize the conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Do you know the one thing inclusive businesses have in common? They have an inclusion statement. And not just any statement, my friend. It's a personal, authentic statement that takes you on a journey. A statement woven with story that paints such a clear picture of who they are as a human that you can't help but take a step closer to their brand and their mission. I know firsthand what it means to read an inclusion statement where I feel so seen and welcome even before I have spoken to the business owner. That's why I want to teach you the art of putting together a powerful inclusion statement from scratch that will leave your right fit clients with no doubt of what you stand for and how your space is the space that allows them to feel welcome, regardless of how they identify. Now, I've put together two of my in-demand workshops, the Inclusion Statement Workshop and the Scholarship Immersion Experience. I'm calling it the Inclusion Bundle, where you only pay for one, but you get both. This is only available for the month of November in honor of Black Friday. If you've ever wanted to create an inclusion statement for your business but don't know where to start, or create a scholarship program to serve those who may not have the access to work with you right now, the Inclusion Bundle is for you. Head over to anikishiru.thrivecart.com/bundle to grab both of these workshops for the price of one. The link is in the show notes. One of the biggest takeaways from my conversation with Monique that has stayed with me was a statistic that she shared that the fastest growing demographic when it comes to business in the United States is Black women. And so if you are a space holder and you're not making room in your business to be of service to Black women, you're missing out. And we do not only talk about that, but we talk about a number of things. Some of the key highlights was the need for rest, that we cannot keep going at the pace at which we started our businesses at. That rest is not just a form of resistance, but it is actually an asset. It's an asset and not a liability. One of the other things that we spoke about was success, what success is, how it looks like, and the cost of success. And this is a conversation I'm so excited for us to dive into today. And here is Monique's bio. She is just gold. So Monique Shields is an executive coach, founder of Seven Pines Leadership, and podcast host of Ambition Without Compromise. is she is committed to liberating the professional imaginations. Ooh, I love that. Of women of color, CEOs, founders, and leaders. As a coach, Monique leverages her own entrepreneurial and executive experience, plus nearly a decade combined of training in coactive mindset coaching, motivational interviewing, interpersonal dynamics, team building, and communications to help her clients find higher forms of leadership and intention in their lives and businesses. Monique was formerly on staff at the Stanford Graduate School of Business as a facilitator for their Women in Management program, as well as their UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business as leadership coach for current MBAs and alumni executives. Personally, Monique is a wife, a mom of two, and a fierce friend to amazing women. She understands what it means to move through fear, something we talk about on the podcast, and distraction to clarify, communicate, and act on a unique definition of success that refuses to compromise what matters most. And she brings this perspective to the work she does with her clients. This is a conversation you will absolutely not want to miss. Here is Monique Shields. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. I am joined today by the wonderful, the beautiful Monique Shields, and I want to give a shout out. I want to give a special shout out to Jerisha Hawk, whom I found you through. She mentioned you in one of her stories a couple of years ago, and I'm like, who is this Monique R Shields she's talking about? And so I raced over to your Instagram. I found you, and I was like, this is, and I do not say this lightly, is a powerhouse. Just the way you spoke, you commanded a certain time, a certain type of authority. You made me want to listen to you. You were getting ready to launch your podcast. And I just followed along on the journey, and then you launched it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this woman is shaking things up. She's gonna go far. And so, fast forward a couple of years later, here we are, Monique. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Oh, I love that you shared that origin story because I actually didn't know the full story as to how you found me and how we got connected in that way. Yeah, Jerisha is speak of powerhouses. She's one of my favorite people. So I'm glad that that connection was made and I'm happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you. Now, gosh, I've got a lot of questions for you, Monique. So, buckle up. But I want us to start from the beginning. How did you arrive here coaching and specifically picking a niche very unique that is supporting women of color CEOs? I was reading a little bit of your story, majoring in English, living in New York, working in a bank, and just not really feeling fulfilled, not knowing what you should be doing in life, and just carrying that burden that you shouldn't have at the time. Uh,
Mhm.
how did you get here?
Yes, from my lost English major days in New York, I always say that that time of my life, I was in my 20s and I didn't know what I wanted. And so I got jobs. I had loans to pay, and I was like, I'm going to get good paying jobs at investment banks and things like that. Um, but I was searching for something that I felt more connected to. And I was kind of moonlighting, testing out things. One of those things happened to be a virtual coaching program that two guys that I met, funny enough, on the plane to Vegas. I was going there for a work event, and I don't know what they were there for. We ended up having brunch because we were like the only Black people on the plane. And so we were like, hey, like, let's connect. And they were doing this. They were running an organization that connected diverse talent with investment banks and consulting firms and things like that. And they had these conferences and they love to get like young, kind of fresh people to come and volunteer. And so I built that relationship and they launched this virtual coaching program for those same folks. And this time, these are people who were entering into MBA programs. So that kind of gave me my first taste of like what coaching can be, but it was a little more resume. I didn't get to pick who I coached, obviously. And I was like, okay, I like this coaching thing, but I'm like, I've spent my career um, really mostly only ever interacting with the most senior people. Like I've only ever worked with the C-suite. Even as like somebody fresh out of college, my first job was with the senior vice president of Simon and Schuster Publishing, and so I was like used to that level of authority, and it was normalized for me. Like I still saw them. I wasn't like shaking in my boots when I would encounter them in the hallways and things like that. And so knowing that, I think about myself and then going through my own therapy journey. My therapist once asked me if I thought I wanted to become a therapist, and I was like, do I want to become a therapist? And I went down that path, just research wise, talking to friends who are psychologists or in grad school and things like that. And I was like, I think I want to be connected to something closer to business. And so when my husband and I moved from New York to California, I kind of reinvented myself. I found this mental health startup. They were looking for coaches. At the time, there were no, these like all these coaching platforms that exist now and all the apps and things like that. Like that, they were one of the first. And so it was this novel concept. And because I had been doing this kind of virtual coaching thing through this organization with the diversity mission, I had a unique background. And so I became their first coach for this mental health coaching product. Then I helped build the team of coaches. Then I became the director of coaching. And so then I was like in this world of coaching. And ultimately, I decided once I had my daughter, she was really the biggest catalyst that I really wanted to, though I loved working there, I wanted to own my time and I wanted to pick who I chose to work with. And I wanted to coach beyond the specific mental health concerns that we were focused on. And so that's what led me to starting my practice. And then I just, I said I really want to own my time and my energy and my mission. I only really want to do work that I care about. And so I said from the beginning that I am building a coaching company for women. That's what I care most about. That's what I feel most connected to. That's the plight that I feel, um, attached to. And so that's why I made that decision. And then I think just through the years, coaching more and more women of color, I was like, yeah, it's us. It's us. Well, I'm just gonna focus on that. And you're right. I do have some clients who are not women of color. I have some white clients, but I'm speaking to us. I'm speaking to women of color, and it makes it much easier to show up and have conversations like this, or to talk to anybody about what it is that I do,
Yeah.
because I feel so connected and aligned with the work that I'm doing. So yeah, that's roundabouts how I got here.
And a big shout out to your daughter being the catalyst for this and wanting to own your time. But you said something really powerful, Monique, in that you wanted to do work that felt something. It was personal. It felt, that you could make a difference, something that you could invest your time and your energy in.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of knowing yourself to do
Mm.
that, to know what you want to do. Because I feel like in life we struggle with what people think we should do. People asking, what do you think I'm good at? What do you think I should do? Going back to parents or caregivers and saying, what line of work should I undertake? And not really listening to yourself and where you're feeling called to. And sometimes it might not be the traditional path that a lot of people who mean
Mhm.
well in our lives want us to take so that we can have that kind of success or freedom that we need. But
Yeah.
just, I feel like it was such a knowing, personally, of this is the direction that I want to take, and I want to really exercise that and see where this takes me.
Yeah. Yeah, I am. It's funny. At the time, I don't know that I felt so like I just know myself so well. But I would say that having my daughter, my first child, and the urgency with which I felt I
Mm.
needed to focus my energy only on things that really lit me up,
Yeah.
that I think that overrode any like need for courage or clarity. It just instantaneously it sharpens your values. It can show, early motherhood especially, I think, can really show you what matters to you and what does not. So I just was like, I can't suffer any foolishness. I can't waste my time trying to, play over here and dilly dabble over there, or do what it is. Every other coach in my coaching training, the first training certification I went through, the way that they were kind of approaching it, I was like, I have no interest in that. Like I am locked in, I am locked in. And it really was that motherhood aspect that made me so focused, because I don't know that I would have been so ruthlessly prioritized had I not been just had my baby girl. So yeah.
Wow, I love that. And I feel like I resonate with that too, because being a mother myself and
Mhm.
becoming a mother for the first time about 11 years ago, my
Mm,
daughter's 11, and it was because of her that I felt such a need to do work that was meaningful. I just felt so called to share the migrant story, the Black story, one that is being told positively and not one that is synonymous with struggle. And especially, calling Australia home. I'm originally from Kenya. I came here as an
mm,
international student, but have lived here longer than I have in Kenya. I've been here for over 20 years. And so Australia
mhm,
is very much home. And
mm,
just feeling like that story needs to be told. We need to share our stories. And so that
yeah.
was very much birthed from becoming a mother and no longer feeling like I can't just be, just be doing things just to make ends meet. I really want to do something that is fulfilling. And Monique, you said serving us, women of color. What is it
Mhm.
about us that you feel so called to? And perhaps, and of course it's being a woman of color yourself and knowing the things that we have to navigate, but is there anything in particular that you just feel, ooh, I have so much to offer in this space. I keep seeing this thought process. I keep seeing, a certain kind of mindset, and I'm here for it. I want to hold space for it, but I just want to champion these women of color to, to go be who they most want to be.
Yes. Okay. So I speak broadly to women of color. I love this question. But my mission, you shared your mission earlier. My mission is to liberate the imaginations, the professional imaginations of women of color, and specifically Black women. I think that the work that we do that can become the most meaningful is it tends to be like an extension of our own lived experience, because you can see it so clearly. And the reason I bring up my mission around liberating our imaginations is that I think that I have, because I worked in, you know, big fancy investment banks, and people are make every, like kids are coming out of college and they're making, multi six-figure salaries, and the guys at the top that are just, I'm having coffee with, um, and it was a male dominated. So that's why I say the guys, heavily male dominated. They're rolling in millions, and the kinds of optionality and the kinds of decisions and things that they're able to make. And I see how Black women and women of color, generally speaking, and I also think if you yourself are not someone who is an immigrant, then were raised by immigrants, this similar sort of mentality where we're just killing ourselves to get half of the return on that investment. And so I I think that there's a great deal of power that can come from, do I have some space, a person that's supporting me in this, that's me as a coach, is what I consider myself to be, but some space to actually imagine that this can look differently, that I don't have to give everything, even my health, over to this work, the way that I'm showing up, and in this overly sacrificial way, and reap true rewards, actually experience abundance, and actually have some fun with it. Can I even imagine that first? Because it has to be seeded, planted in here first in our minds. And I would say also maybe, energetically, spiritually, however you see it, that has to live inside of you before you can create it outside of you. And so that is something that I feel so strongly about, because I think I just have witnessed folks who exist in so much, specifically financial abundance and, social optionality, um, and how free they feel to create and to do and to build. I mentioned my work at that startup. I was working with folks who exceptionally smart, people, but a lot of them had gone to like Ivy League, top schools, and just had access in different ways, and maybe, inherited a different kind of financial standing than many of us do, right? And so but the way that they felt free to innovate and to choose how they spent their time and energy and what they built and poured themselves into. I was like, we deserve that. We deserve that too. Everyone deserves that. And
Wow.
so that's a big part of why I do what I do.
As you're saying that, I was just imagining, the role of equity. If
Mm,
we all just had, opportunities that leveled the playing field, Monique,
yeah.
how
Yeah.
much more would we be able to progress? Because there's so much we are carrying, there's so much setbacks and challenges and just unique barriers that are set for, people of color. And by the time you're done with that, and you kind of never get done with it, you kind of
Hmm.
learn how to maneuver and exist in that world to then
Hmm.
get to where you are. There's just so much to plow through. And when you
Yeah.
do make it, there's such a small fraction, such a small percentage of those who do make it, that
Hmm.
it often feels unattainable. Now, I support women of color as well as a coach myself. And some of
Hmm.
the things, one of the major things I would say, the traits that I see coming through is this mindset of I'm not good enough. I have
Yeah.
to keep it's like they'll get this qualification, Monique, and then you'll hear they've signed up for this program or they're doing something like they're always doing. They're always part of something,
Hmm.
part of this mastermind. Oh, and I'm doing this at work. And you're
Hmm.
just like, when does it stop? At what point do you go like, I have enough? Let me now kind of nurture and harness what I have and begin to serve in the way that I need to and should. There's just the doing. And it's that cycle, being in that kind of hamster wheel that just
Hmm.
keeps you in this mindset of you're not good enough. You have to keep trying to chase whatever that thing is. Do you encounter that? And if you do, how, I suppose, how do you help them break from that? And I know they're coming to you with a dream. This is what I envision. The seed has been planted. But how do you help them just kind of unshackle that?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. Number one, most of my clients are either actually CEOs or functionally CEOs, meaning they have a great deal of um, freedom to decide, to direct, and I just want to name that because it can feel a little bit different when you're operating within a much larger corporation, for instance.
Right.
Um, in either case, one thing that I know to be true is that when you kept saying this, the doing, you get on this hamster wheel, you're in the doing, you're in the doing, you're in the doing. And those environments, whether it is you're owning your own business and you're just in your industry environment or you're inside of a larger corporation, that broader business environment um, feeds off of you constantly looking and acting as if you are busy because it's like a surrogate for being productive, air quote. And so I think the biggest thing that I offer to my clients, because all of them come to me with some version of this hamster wheel experience of their careers, is what does it look like to step into session with me? Because this holds them accountable. What does it look like to step into session with me and stop? To actually just stop. The number of times maybe we'll talk about my client's calendar and we'll look meeting, stack, 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 meeting. I'm like, when do you have time to think? Right. The environment, this pressure to produce constantly, and then there's layers of pressure, obviously, when you're a woman of color on top of that, to appear productive. It gets you wound up and you never have time to draw back into actually, we love to throw on the word strategic, to actually be strategic, not just with your time, but with your energy. There is so much more, especially when you are one of those women who have, you've been busting your butt and you've made it to whatever level that you've made it to. Uh, I think what happens as a switch has to turn on for you to stop and look around and recognize that you're actually kind of above the clouds now. And the grind season has to come to a halt. But it is really hard when you have built up years and years and years of momentum and a whole identity around looking and being and acting and doing productivity, um, to step outside of that. It feels very painful. It feels very scary, but it is incredibly necessary to actually stop and take a bird's eye view and start making decisions from a more intrinsic place. So it's the stopping that matters most.
The stopping, and it reminds me of what you've been talking about currently around
Mm,
rest, the
yes.
need for rest, that rest is not just something that is resistance. Yes, rest is resistance, but it's also an asset. It is not a
Mhm.
liability. It is an asset. We need it, but we're not very good at resting. And I remember I put a comment on the post that you had shared, just saying that that's one area that I really, really struggle with to rest as an entrepreneur. Because every time I want to rest, I'm thinking, I'm being so unproductive, Monique. How
Mhm.
is this resting generating some kind of growth personally or professionally? And so there's that mind, two minds of I need to rest, I so need to rest, but I need to also be doing, even though the doing is like holding a book and reading or learning more things
Just
or listening
something.
to a podcast, just something, yes. And so, because I think that we've been taught, and correct me if
Mhm.
I'm wrong, like rest is synonymous with laziness. Like if you're completely resting and being it's not like you're being unproductive, really. You are
Mhm.
recharging. You're
Mhm.
being, lazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the cultural narrative is. And, so much of what ails us in our leadership and our personal lives, our health and everything is driven by the narratives that uphold just capitalism at large, right? And so it's this tricky thing to both, okay, I am in this capitalistic society. I do need to make money and, put food on the table and I want to travel and, do the things as well for myself. But how can I operate within this without being a victim of it? And to learn how I can give myself moments to step outside of it and take a breather and yeah, reground in what something that matters more than just the doing, the doing, the doing. I will say that I know that rest looks a lot of different ways. I think the laziness, I mean, there's lots of historical ties there. But the feeling I think of laziness can feel like it's tied to resting equaling stopping, um,
Mhm.
which means like I'm just doing nothing, which there is a great deal of value in that. But there's all kinds of ways to rest that are actually probably the most productive. The thing that I always like to point out to my clients and to women I talk to who are just like you, extremely high achieving, getting a lot of things done, juggling lots of things, right? But still trying to find space for rest, is that if you have been able to accomplish everything that you've accomplished to this point, as tired as you are, can you imagine what would actually be possible for you if you were fully rested and just focused? Because I think where we get really worn out, and I go through seasons of this, I'm constantly in this stance with myself. I don't think anybody gets this perfectly of expansion and contraction. So sometimes we'll expand in our scope, our breadth of responsibilities, and the things that are getting our attention. We let the scope creep too far out, too wide. And it's about how can I narrow back into like what actually matters, and that's where the rest comes into play because it's hard to see and to feel what actually matters, so that you can choose and focus your energy on that thing and make that thing great instead of everything being are you familiar with the book? What's it called? The Big Leap. It's a
Yes.
very popular book. Yes. Okay. And he talks about the different zones. There's like competence and excellence, and then there's a zone of genius, right? I truly believe that our zone of genius is a very narrow place. It's a
Mhm.
very specific place. You can't be a genius at all things, right? But many of us, if you're multi-talented and you've got energy, you're excellent at a lot of things. And that can be actually very distracting from what you're truly meant to be doing, which is the thing that you're genius at. And that takes a moment of pause, of rest, lots of moments of pause and rest, to find a space to see it again. right? Because I think we get taken out of our genius and then we're trying to compensate for not feeling like a genius at the thing that we should be focused on because we're kind of excellent at a lot of things. And it's
Mhm.
a trap.
It is. It is an absolute trap. And as you were sharing that, I've been thinking about, when I was getting support from my coach for quite a number of years, and she always would try and get me to rest, like take a break. But, I started my business back in 2019, and there was just this desire to just keep going, going, going. And I kind of felt like if I stopped, everything would stop. And those
Yeah.
early years of business where you're like, I just have to keep going. I just have to keep going. I have to get to that point. And when I get to that point, maybe I will stop. But it did get to the point where I did get to burnout. You can't, the same pace you started with is not, you cannot keep going how you
Yeah.
began to your middle, to your whatever level. It's just not sustainable. And
Mm.
there's this reel that went viral.
Mm.
A reel that you created that went viral. That
Oh.
remember that reel? It has like
Um,
2.4 million views and counting. Monique, we're
yes.
talking about burnout. Could you just tell
Yes.
us briefly about that?
Yes. Okay. So at the moment that I created that reel, I had come off of a series of client conversations and personal conversations with women in my network in particular, where everybody was just there was this like collective exhaustion. And it wasn't like a normal, like, oh, girl, just kind of tired or it's been a busy week or busy month. It's like it was like there's this trend that I just feel like I'm seeing, and I spend my days as you do, talking to lots of women. And so I'm like, there is something in the air. And I was like, I'm feeling versions of this myself. Like there's something going on, I felt like in the wake of the years that have passed since COVID arrived. That we were just running and running and trying to survive. And now, then we tried to get outside and have fun. And then then we kind of crashed. Um, and I think that we're still, trying to figure out the cost of that season in history. But yeah, that was where that post came from. And I think just in general, it's tricky. Like I said before, I don't think that we ever totally figure out how to do this perfectly because we are operating in the society that we're operating in that requires us to be a certain kind of productive. So we're going to always have that pull to do more. But I think you're absolutely right when you say, early on, because there are seasons for sprinting. There just are. But
Yeah.
that's not sustainable, and it's hard when you're in a sprint momentum to look up and recognize like, oh, actually, I don't I don't need to sprint anymore. We've now switched to a marathon. We're no longer running the sprint race. And how do I adjust my pace? And sometimes you don't recognize it, and then you get sat down, and you have to, you're forced to adjust your pace. So, or your body suffers, or something suffers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's tricky.
It really is tricky, and especially when it comes to, as you were saying, taking that big leap and just zeroing in on that zone of genius. You kind of looking around, going like, "Oh, but what about that? And what about that? But that could also work."
Yeah.
It just you find yourself in this position where again you're in indecision. There's overwhelm. You don't know if you make this decision, how this might turn out. But also there's
Mhm.
the pressure of being visible and being present. And like right now on social media, it is so noisy. Monique, it is just so noisy. And I've
Yeah.
noticed that you've done something different. You have unfollowed everybody
Hmm.
apart from your
From my
podcast.
podcast.
Um, Tell me, where did this come from? And I know you share this on your podcast, but where did this come from? This whole I'm unfollowing, and how is this experiment, social experiment, going for you? Because gosh, it's been a little while now, right?
Yeah, it's been about almost, we're getting like third month maybe now. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, heading into the third month-ish, I think. I've kind of stopped counting because I'm just going off of what do I feel? And if I don't wake up on a day and I'm like, I need to start following everybody again, then I don't do it. And I have not had that urge yet. There's like a should that's operating that's like, you're missing out on things. There's a little bit of FOMO happening. But it's never been strong enough to be like, well, what's the real reason? But yeah, the origin, I guess, of this experiment was that I think number one, the algorithm has just gotten good. I'm sorry. The folks over at Instagram, they have gotten good at what they do. And I just found myself being pulled into that eternal scroll far more than I had in the past. And especially this year in particular. I'm like, the technology is doing its thing. So I was like, the gravitational pull on my attention is feeling too powerful. And I don't like that. And I keep saying out loud to myself, I say to my coach, I'm always working with coaches and my therapist now as well. I want more grounding. I'm looking for more like, spaciousness and clarity. And it's like I can feel there's this big pull on my attention over here with this app, which I also show up to share my content for those who want to engage with me in that way. And so it's like, how can I both be here but not be here right now? Like my defenses feel weakened. I just don't feel like I'm able to cope with this technology the way I used to. And so, yeah, I was on a phone call with a girlfriend who was saying a similar thing with her. She was like, I have like a full-on addiction and I have this big idea, these things I want to move for. And I feel like I'm, kind of stuck in this. And so we both kind of made a pact I was the only one who unfollowed everybody, but she did her own version of this to kind of whittle down some people she was following as well and have a new nighttime and morning routine where she locked her phone. We actually bought lock boxes for our phones. So yeah, I mean, I think what matters most is just finding ways to be responsive to what's actually happening in your mind and in your body. If you feel like something is dragging on your energy or your attention in a way that is negatively impacting your life, your relationships, your work, whatever it may be, I tell my clients this all the time. I tell anybody ever speaking to, like, we have to learn to not be tolerant of things that take us out of ourselves, to not be tolerant of things that cause unnecessary, um, not just discomfort, but distraction and pain and, in our lives. We don't need to suffer from Instagram. It's not that serious.
I like
So
how
yeah.
you put that. Like we don't have to suffer from Instagram. That is so, so true.
Mhm.
But what you said earlier, the algorithm has gotten so good. And for
So
me
good.
personally, this is what it does to me.
Mm.
I will be working on something and then I'll go like, oh, I need to look this up. I need to look either a person up, an organization. I want to check out something, and especially being an educator in the space of, racial equity and anti-racism, I'm like, I'll quickly have a look. But as soon as I get on my feed, Monique, because it's
Mhm.
feeding me the things I've been looking at, the things that I've been searching, I get distracted by recipes, hair, nails.
Yes.
Before, I kid you not, it's happened so many times. I go like, why was I here?
Yep.
Why did I come here? And sometimes my daughter will go like, Mom, you were looking for that. I'm like, oh God, thank you so much. Because the first thing when you open it up, it's all like your search, whatever, like the things that
Mhm.
it knows you might like.
Mhm.
That's a really nice wash and go. Like, what product is that?
Yep.
It's exhausting, but it
It,
knows us so well and it will keep you there longer and longer. And you're so right. You've got to not let Instagram run your life. And
yeah.
another area that I'm finding really interesting, and especially for us as coaches, as people who are holding space for others, there's so much in the social media space that's just telling. It's telling you what to do, telling you like
Mhm.
this is what you need to do. There are just so many people in our ears that you could be hearing the best advice, but you just don't have the capacity. You just do
Mhm.
not have the space for it
Yeah.
because there's too much. It's there's just too much to take in. And so, how are you navigating this? And maybe even for your clients who are using social media, you are still showing up on
Mhm.
your page and sharing. How are you navigating this? Is it something that you're thinking of or considering? Like everybody's just talking, everybody's saying, do this, do that, or this is what's going on. how do we actually, how do our people find us and actually listen and engage given the current climate we're in?
Yeah. So I think about this a lot. Obviously, I'm actively in this experiment with an indefinite end date. And I think for me, I think it's going to remain somewhat experimental, just continuously trying different things and seeing how it feels. So unfollowing everybody, for instance, has shifted. The algorithm doesn't know me as well anymore. And so the content that it feeds me is not as sticky. It doesn't grab me the same way. Right now, it kind of the way it works is it's like it shows me kind of like what's popular in the world. It seems like here are some of like the top posts that everybody is kind of into. And so that might I might look at a few things, but it doesn't keep me the same way as when it knew I was following and it would show me what all my girlfriends and all like, the my faves that I like to follow are liking and, so it just hooks me. And what I also have been thinking a lot about is what it looks like to, it's one of the reasons I started my podcast, to develop relationships with folks and make sure I give access to, my message and the things that I'm sharing, whatever it is I'm learning, in various other mediums. It doesn't have to all be on Instagram. So I think my podcast is one of my favorite places to play in that way because it's long form and it's something that people feel really empowered. Like your podcast, the app is not going to hook you or addict you, necessarily the same way that scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or something like that will. And so it's people can choose when they're ready to listen to me and can have a longer conversation, with me. I have a longer engagement. I'm working on my getting like a more regular cadence around my newsletter. I'm still figuring out the formula there for me, but some people really love just to like, I just want to get a newsletter every other week or once a month, and I can share lots of value that way, and it doesn't feel so over consuming and yeah, so distracting. Yeah, just giving more control to folks who don't want to engage there because I think you have to listen to yourself. If I me, I one of the things I was like kind of nervous about, but then also like excited for is that I was like, I post this thing and say, hey, I've unfollowed everybody, and then I'm sure I have some people probably unfollowed me based on that post because I was telling you, hey, if you want to try this, do it. Um, but I kind of love that, I would love to be the catalyst for that for someone who knows that that's what they really need to do in this season, and it's worked out.
That is so
Yeah.
good to hear. And I'll be curious, I'll be following along and just curious to see how this evolves and grows for you. I want to switch gears now, ever so slightly, and talk about success in entrepreneurship because it brings a lot of positive things, success, be it however we choose to define it. And earlier during our intro conversation, talking about those people who have access to things, you saw how that was when you were working with them, the freedoms that they have, ability to make choices. So success comes with a lot of positive things, and living a certain lifestyle as well. But it can also come at a cost. And I remember not too long ago, you made reference to success, can cost you a certain level of safety, like the safety
Yeah.
that you had before is not there. It's not as it used to be. Do you think you can elaborate on that a little bit, Monique?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about some of the most successful people in the world, people who are, I'll say, visibly successful, because there's a lot of quiet multimillionaires and even billionaires that you don't know. Nobody knows who they are. And I think that's a beautiful way to be successful. Um, but for many folks, there's a visible success, and whether or not you're visible to the general public or just to your family or private or smaller community, um, it creates distance, automatically. It's like inherent in becoming successful because you've done something that those around you haven't done or haven't had access to do for various reasons. Doesn't mean you're better than them or anything like that. But it creates this outlier kind of relationship. So you are no longer fully belonging to where you came from, and I think especially this can be tricky as people of color in general and women of color, I think for sure. or just any marginalized group, that you also don't fully belong to the majority of folks who are at whatever the other end of success is. So you can live in this kind of this borderlands between the two, and it can be really, really isolating. And I think that's one of the biggest risks of not really designing as best you can success to look a way that actually supports your humanity, your personal longevity and vitality, your connectedness, because that is waiting for you no matter what you try to do, some version of that. So, what have you done to plant seeds to ensure that there is some community with you that you find in those borderlands? Because you don't have to be alone, especially in this day and age. So many more women of color. There's a stat that somebody was quoting the other day that we've heard that Black women are the ones who are creating businesses at the fastest rate, at least in America,
Mhm.
um, of all of the other demographic groups. But there's another study that I think was more recently done that also says that Black women, though we are definitely not the wealthiest, we are closing the gap, like the speed at which we are obtaining wealth is the fastest as well. So we're not at the highest for sure, nowhere near that. But the gap that we are closing, the speed at which we're moving to close that wealth gap,
Mhm.
is the fastest. We're the fastest group to grow in wealth. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
And so, so that tells you that there's more of you out there, right? There's more of us out there. And so I think prioritizing, how can I make sure that I am building community? I am finding, if not just one, other woman who gets it, who's on a path adjacent to mine, and we can support each other. It has been critical to my well-being, to my sense of, psychological safety and sense of belonging. The more that I have been able to create through my business and in my life, that I continue to create community along the way. Um, but yeah, it's really that isolation factor that I think of when it getting really tricky with success.
What is your message to online business owners, specifically coaches who have businesses, but they don't have us in mind? And especially with the statistics that you've shared there, we
Mm-hmm.
are some of the most educated, some of the most hardworking individuals. And when you leave out a certain demographic because you think that perhaps they may not be the right fit,
Mm-hmm.
you are missing out on
Yeah.
the potential of not only lifting up a certain group of people, but also that your inclusion is tied to your income. Is there anything that you could add to that when it comes to particularly white women in business?
Yeah. So, we think about like antiquated businesses like Blockbuster Video, right? And holding on to antiquated practices will keep you stuck in the past. But I point to that business because immediately what I thought of was Netflix. I point to that business leap in particular because it's not just that Netflix invented a new technology and a new way of consuming and engaging with media, right? With their streaming, so first their CDs and then their streaming DVDs and then streaming. But as soon as they got their streaming platform, they recognized that there was a gap in diverse speaking to diverse audiences. That's why like every Netflix produced show has the most vast array of representation, I think, than you see anywhere else. And other platforms and other production houses and things like that, they're beginning to catch on. And I don't know what Netflix is worth today, but they have been a crazy industry leader because they captured the hearts and the minds and the attention of so many more people. So this boils down to dollars and cents. Whether or not you believe in uplifting, other groups or in equity at all, whether or not that is a part of your values, if you are in business to make money, this is a critical part of your future. This is a critical part of the equation. You cannot leave out entire swaths of the market and expect to continuously grow forever and ever. It's not going to happen. So I would like to just make the pure business case. That's what happens. And Netflix is one shining example, but there are many examples of other businesses who are making a lot more money by being far more inclusive.
I honestly, I couldn't have said it better. I couldn't agree more. And as we're progressing, as we're moving on year, we're getting different generations coming through,
Hmm.
and their ideals are different. They are more leaning towards social justice matters, leaning towards issues to do with human rights. And if you're not positioning yourself, and not even just positioning, if the work of being inclusive is not something that is embedded in your business, you're going to suffer.
Hmm.
There will be repercussions. And this is not work that you can just do on the surface. It's not about having an inclusion statement and you're good. This is work that you just have to be doing continually, because how do you hold space for somebody like myself or yourself if you're not educating yourself and learning about the challenges, the barriers, the issues that are getting in the way? Because if I come to you and I say, I'm struggling to show up, this is how I'm feeling, but you don't understand the systemic barriers that exist, how are you going to be able to coach me through the place at where I'm at to help me get to the other side if this is not work that you're doing? And so I feel so strongly that this is work that is part and parcel of how you do life. It's part and
Hmm.
parcel of how you do business. Inclusion is not separate. It's not something that you just tick a box for business or it's a good to have. It is an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Okay, where to from here, Monique? I feel like you're in a season of change. I feel like there's a shift coming through. I've been listening to you, I've been watching you on stories and just saying, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be doing this forever, like how you've been holding space. What what are you navigating right now? What are you gravitating more towards? I know rest is a big one.
Yeah.
But what's coming through for you intuitively?
Yes. I'm so glad that you asked this question because it forces me to articulate my dreams and the things that I am kind of grappling with. So, um, first and foremost, the trend I see, I think with the not really the advent, but the proliferation of AI is that there is going to become a divide that and a chasm, I think, um, in the way that business is done and where people, I guess, conceptualize like value and what is it, what becomes a necessity, what becomes exciting and most useful, just from like kind of a business perspective, right? On one hand, there are things that can be done by machines and algorithms, and then on the other hand, there is human interaction that can never be replaced. That a robot, no matter how good the AI is, can never replace. And and I'm also just seeing like that's just the business level sort of kind of general market view, but I'm also seeing in a micro way in the conversations that I'm having and just in my own lived experience, speaking back to that isolation point, that people are becoming more and more fed up with feeling isolated. And I think I get, this is probably when I get DMs or emails, this is because anytime I mention community building or connection, people are always asking, so do you have a community or like, do you have a thing? Do you have a group that I can join? Because I'm looking for, I need it, I need it, I need it.
Yeah.
I'm looking for that place to ground myself and to be with other humans
Mhm.
offline. So in-person experiences is something that I'm really focused on in the coming years. Definitely leading into next year. And this year I've kind of been dabbling, leading a few retreats that I've been invited or hired to come and lead. But in the coming year, I'm going to be creating my own in-person experiences specific to women of color in particular. And I'm really, really, really excited to do that because I think it is just going to become more and more and more of a necessity for us to still feel human spaces where humans can feel like humans together. Um, and to build together and to heal together and to play together and to rest together. So that is what I'm most excited about in the coming year in particular. And I think in the years to come, because like I said, that divide with technology, the way it's heading and the way that we need each other is going to, I think, intensify. And I want to be there to create that space because I'm really good at it, specifically for women of color, to have that intimate connection and vulnerability and to not be alone.
Okay, where's the wait list? Because people are listening going like, okay, I'm in. Where do I need to put my email?
Well, there will be a wait list,
Yeah.
actually. This is something that I feel so strongly about. And I'll put it out there now that I don't have a wait list up yet, but I will probably have something on my website in the next week or two, MoniqueRShields.com. So you can always check there if you want to learn more.
Absolutely. Last question, and I always ask this of all my guests, and particularly I think for you, this one will be really interesting because of how you hold space and the things that you help your clients with. And the question is, if fear wasn't a factor, how do you think you might show up in your work?
Gosh. Okay. Oh, Annie. Okay. Yeah. If fear wasn't a factor, I would likely buy I don't know if it's a vineyard or a ranch or just some but a retreat space. I would I would buy that. I would have a space that I own and that is a gathering place for these special kinds of groups, for that connection and vulnerability and building together. I would own it.
Mm. When you said that, I just thought of Rachel Rogers. As soon as you said
Yeah.
that, her ranch just came into mind.
Yes, the infamous Rachel Rogers
Yes,
ranch.
I love the tangibility of it. The fact that there is somebody that we know of, and I'm sure you
Yes.
know quite well,
Yes.
um, has achieved that. And so that is not far from achieving. As you said, it starts with a seed. You've got to, feel it, believe it, and then, dream it, and then it
Yeah.
comes into fruition. And I sincerely hope that that becomes a reality for you, Monique. I am so
Thank
grateful for our time together. Thank you for saying yes to a stranger on the internet who has been following you for a few years. And where is the best place that people can connect with you?
Yes. So I am still active on Instagram. So Monique R Shields, you have to remember the R on Instagram. That's kind of if you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Monique R Shields as well. And then my website, MoniqueRShields.com, if you want to learn a little bit more about me and my story and the things going on there.
I
Oh,
will
and
be,
obviously my podcast. My
of course.
podcast is called Ambition Without Compromise. Yes.
I will pop all those links in the show notes so that, once you're done listening, just race over there, click, 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 follow, follow, follow. Because Monique is definitely somebody you want to be learning from. Thank you so much for our time together. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. Pimbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.